I am Julian, 29 years old. Exactly 1 year ago, my own brother stood at the altar wearing my custom-made wedding tuxedo, a piece of clothing I had worked overtime for months to afford. While I watched him say his vows, my mother leaned over and whispered that he deserved to shine today and that I could always buy something cheap off the rack for my little wedding next year. She smiled at me, expecting me to nod like the obedient, invisible backup child I have always been. They were laughing at me, my own flesh and blood, humiliating me in front of 200 guests, treating my life, my property, and my milestones as a donor bank for my older brother Tristan. But there was something they did not know about that tuxedo. They did not know about the quiet trip I made to the tailor after they stole it from my home. They did not know about the specialized water-reactive chemical dye woven directly into the custom silk lining. And as the garden's massive, automated fountain system whirred to life directly behind the altar, they were all about to find out. In just a few moments, my brother would be begging for a towel, and my mother would be experiencing a level of public regret she never thought possible. Before I tell you exactly what happened, hit that like button if you believe in justice and karma. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything to me. Now, let us go back to where this entire nightmare began. To understand the sheer audacity of my family, you have to understand the dynamic I grew up in. Tristan is 3 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, the sun rises and sets on his command. He was the golden child. I was the shadow. This was not a subtle preference. It was a loud, proud, and structurally enforced hierarchy within our household. If Tristan brought home a mediocre report card, my parents would schedule a meeting with the principal to complain about the curriculum. If I brought home straight honors, my mother would barely look up from her magazine, waving a hand and telling me not to let it go to my head. It was not just about grades or attention. It was deeply systemic, bleeding into every financial and emotional decision our family made. I remember sitting at our Thanksgiving dinners, the massive turkey in the center of the table, and Tristan always got the seat of honor next to my father, carving the bird, while I was relegated to the end of the table next to the drafty window, usually tasked with refilling water glasses. When it came time for college, the family college fund, money my late grandparents had specifically set aside in a joint trust for both of us, mysteriously went entirely to Tristan's out-of-state private university tuition. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I was the practical one, the resilient one, and that I could handle a state school and student loans. I worked 2 grueling jobs in retail and food service to pay my way through, building my savings, desperately trying to start a 401k on a meager salary, while Tristan was taking European vacations on my parents' dime. The theft of my tuxedo was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of them taking what was mine and handing it to him on a silver platter. When I was valedictorian of my high school class, I spent 4 weeks writing my graduation speech. I poured my heart into it, talking about resilience and stepping out of the shadows. 2 days before the ceremony, our extended family gathered for a celebratory barbecue. Tristan found my printed draft on my desk, memorized the best paragraphs, and used them in a grand toast to himself, passing the words off as his own spontaneous brilliance. The entire family clapped. My grandfather wept. When I confronted Tristan in the hallway, my Aunt Vivian, my mother's sister and the family's ultimate enabler, stepped between us. She patted my shoulder and told me I needed to be a team player. She explicitly said Tristan was struggling with his college courses and needed the confidence boost. That was the running theme of my entire existence. My achievements were community property. His failures were community tragedies that required my immediate sacrifice to fix. I thought things would change when I met Fiona. Fiona is brilliant, fiercely loyal, and the only person who ever walked into my family's house and saw right through the polished, toxic dysfunction. She is an auditor by trade, someone who looks at the numbers and the facts without any emotional manipulation clouding her judgment. When I proposed to her, I did it with a modest, vintage ring I had saved up for over a year. We were saving for our future together, prioritizing a down payment on prime real estate over a massive, flashy diamond. My family's reaction was lukewarm at best. My mother barely hugged her, giving the ring a dismissive glance, and Tristan made a loud, passing joke about how I must have gotten a good discount at a pawn shop. I swallowed my pride. I squeezed Fiona's hand under the table and told myself their opinions did not matter. I told myself I was building my own family now, free from their toxic hierarchy. Then came Tristan's engagement to Bianca. Bianca was a local socialite, the daughter of a prominent real estate developer, and their wedding was slated to be the event of the decade in our town. Suddenly, my parents' wallets blew wide open. They were talking about inheritance advances to pay for imported ice sculptures, a 10-tier cake, and a live orchestra. They completely remortgaged their mindset to cater to Tristan's every extravagant whim. And that is exactly where the real trouble started. That is where they crossed the line from emotional neglect to outright theft, setting the stage for the most spectacular downfall I could have ever engineered. 6 months before Tristan's grand wedding, my parents threw him an engagement party at their sprawling suburban house. It was a lavish affair. They hired a catering company, a string quartet, and a valet service. They transformed their backyard into a country club setting. Fiona and I arrived on time, dressed appropriately, carrying a very generous gift we had carefully selected. But the moment we stepped through the heavy oak front door, my mother intercepted us. She did not greet Fiona. She did not offer us a drink. She looked right at me, pointed a manicured finger toward the kitchen, and completely stripped me of my dignity as a guest. The catering staff was running behind schedule, and she decided she needed someone to manage the appetizers and refill the champagne tower. I was wearing a tailored suit. I was an invited guest. I was the brother of the groom. But within 5 minutes of arriving, I was pushed into the hot, chaotic kitchen. A damp towel thrust into my hand, wiping down granite countertops while Tristan held court in the living room like a king. Fiona refused to mingle without me. She stayed by my side, her jaw tight with suppressed anger, helping me arrange shrimp cocktails on silver platters. I saw the look in her eyes. It was a mixture of deep sorrow for the way I was treated and absolute, unadulterated fury. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island until my knuckles turned white. Through the doorway, I could hear the booming laughter of my relatives. I could hear Tristan bragging about his new promotion, a lucrative management job my father had pulled major industry strings to secure for him. I could hear Aunt Vivian laughing loudly, praising Bianca's massive, ostentatious engagement ring, intentionally raising her voice whenever Fiona was in earshot. It was calculated psychological warfare. "Julian, can we please just leave?" Fiona asked, her voice low and steady, vibrating with indignation. "You do not deserve this. We do not have to tolerate this kind of blatant disrespect. Let us just get through tonight," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "If we leave now, they will make me the villain. They will call me jealous and bitter. They will spin a narrative that I tried to ruin his night. I just want to keep the peace." I picked up a heavy tray of filled champagne flutes and walked out into the living room, pasting a neutral expression on my face. Tristan was standing by the grand fireplace, one arm wrapped possessively around Bianca. He looked at me, stopped his conversation mid-sentence, snapped his fingers and pointed to his empty glass. I walked over, my face a mask of stone, and handed him a fresh drink. "Thanks, Jules," he said loudly, making sure the people around him were watching. He looked at my suit, a standard off-the-rack navy number I wore to the office. "You know, you really should invest in a better tailor. You look like a substitute teacher who got lost on the way to the faculty lounge." A few of his wealthy friends chuckled. Bianca giggled behind her hand. My mother, standing just a few feet away, smiled warmly at him, completely ignoring the public insult thrown at my face. I turned around and walked back toward the hallway, needing a moment to breathe before I lost my temper completely. The air in that room was suffocating. I felt like I was shrinking, reverting back to that helpless teenager who had to watch his brother steal his valedictorian speech. The hallway was dark, leading toward my father's home office. I stopped near the slightly ajar door to catch my breath in the quiet corridor. That is when I heard them. My mother and Tristan were inside the office, their voices hushed but perfectly audible in the silence of the hallway. "He is going to look terrible in the official wedding photos if he wears that cheap navy thing," Tristan complained, the ice in his glass clinking. "Bianca's family is paying a fortune for the photographer. We cannot have him looking like a peasant in the family portraits." "Do not worry about Julian," my mother replied smoothly, her tone dismissive. "Actually, I have a solution for your wardrobe issue, too. You mentioned you did not like the rental options for the groomsmen, and you wanted something truly stand out for yourself. Something bespoke. Yeah, Bianca wants me in custom ivory or white, but bespoke takes months of fittings, and we are out of time. Plus, the budget is tight since we upgraded the floral arrangements and added the raw oyster bar." "Julian just bought a bespoke tuxedo," my mother said. I froze. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. My heart stopped beating for a full second. It was true. For the past 8 months, I had been working extra shifts, taking on freelance consulting projects, and saving every spare dollar I could hide from my daily expenses. I had gone to a high-end master tailor in the city named Sylvia. I commissioned a charcoal gray, silk-lined, perfectly fitted tuxedo made specifically for my own wedding. I had brought it home just 2 days ago. I was so incredibly proud of it. It was the first truly luxurious thing I had ever bought for myself. Like an idiot seeking validation, I had mistakenly shown my mother a picture of it on my phone, hoping for just an ounce of maternal pride. "It is absolutely stunning," my mother continued, her voice filled with admiration that was entirely directed at the garment, not the son who earned it. Hand-stitched lapels, imported Italian wool, cost him an absolute fortune. It would fit you perfectly, Tristan. You guys are the same height, and you have a slightly broader shoulder, but it would look so much better on you. Are you serious? Julian bought a custom tux? For his little backyard thing? Tristan scoffed, the disdain thick in his throat. He will never let me wear it. He is obsessed with that kind of stuff. He will if I tell him to, my mother said, her voice dripping with that absolute, unquestionable authority she always used to bulldoze my boundaries. He is your brother. He owes you this. Besides, his wedding is not until next year. It is just sitting in his closet gathering dust. I have his spare apartment key from when he went on vacation last year. I will just go pick it up tomorrow, and we can have it taken in a bit for you. It is the perfect solution. Mom, you are a lifesaver, Tristan said, sounding genuinely relieved. Bianca is going to be thrilled. I backed away from the heavy wooden door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. They were not asking. They had no intention of asking. They were planning a heist. They felt entirely entitled to unlock my front door, walk into my private sanctuary, take my most prized possession, and alter it permanently for his use. The sheer disrespect, the absolute disregard for my autonomy, my privacy, and my hard-earned salary hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I walked straight back to the kitchen, grabbed Fiona's hand so tightly she gasped, and walked out the back door into the cool night air. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I did not care about the appetizers. I drove home in absolute, deafening silence. The gears in my mind were turning at a frantic, dangerous pace. I thought about calling a lawyer to draft a cease and desist. I thought about changing my locks that very night. But as I pulled into my driveway and stared at the dark windows of my apartment, a different kind of clarity washed over me. If I changed the locks, they would play the victim. They would call me paranoid and selfish. My mother would cry to the entire extended family that I was keeping her out of my life over a piece of clothing. They would find another way to ruin my peace, another way to assert their dominance. No, crying, yelling, and setting normal boundaries had never worked with these people. If they wanted to play a game of entitlement and theft, I was going to change the rules completely. I was going to let them steal it. And then, I was going to make them regret it for the rest of their natural lives. The next morning, I woke up with a cold, singular focus. I left for work at my usual time, but I intentionally left my apartment exactly as it was. The heavy black garment bag containing my bespoke tuxedo was hanging prominently on the outside of my bedroom door, practically begging to be taken. I knew my mother's schedule perfectly. She played tennis on Tuesday mornings and always ran her errands in my side of town right after. I knew she would strike around noon. At exactly 1:15 p.m., I was sitting at my desk when my phone vibrated. The discreet security camera I had placed on my living room bookshelf pinged with a high-priority motion alert. I locked my office door, put my headphones in, and watched the live feed on my screen. There was my mother, casually letting herself in with the spare key I had given her for emergencies. Trailing right behind her, looking around my apartment with a critical, judgmental eye, was Aunt Vivian. "Just grab it quickly, Margaret." Aunt Vivian's voice echoed thinly, but clearly through the phone speaker. I still say he should just hand it over willingly, but you know how stubborn Julian gets about his little things. We do not want him walking in and throwing a fit. My mother walked straight into my bedroom, disappearing from the camera's view for 5 seconds, and emerged carrying the thick garment bag. "It is fine, Vivian. We are family. What is his is ours. Tristan needs this more. Julian can just wear his navy suit or we will buy him a rental. It is not like his bride is expecting a royal wedding." They walked out, my mother turning the deadbolt and locking my door behind them as if she were a responsible homeowner securing the premises. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank screen of my phone long after the feed cut out. It is a very specific, deeply violating type of trauma to watch your own mother rob you. It was not just a piece of clothing. It was my dignity. It was my physical safety. It was the physical manifestation of my hard work, my late nights, my sacrificed weekends, being casually carted off to decorate the golden child for a day that had absolutely nothing to do with me. I did not scream. I did not break anything. I calmly closed my laptop, told my supervisor I had a family emergency, left work early, and drove straight to my parents' massive suburban house. I did not knock. I pushed the heavy front door open and walked straight into the formal living room. It was a scene straight out of a psychological thriller. Tristan was standing on the expensive Persian rug in front of the antique full-length mirror. He was wearing my tailored trousers and my exquisite charcoal jacket. My mother was kneeling by his feet with a mouthful of silver pins, pulling the imported fabric tightly against his waist to see exactly how much they needed to permanently alter it to fit his slightly heavier frame. Aunt Vivian was sitting comfortably on the sofa, sipping tea from a porcelain cup. "Take it off," I said. My voice was not loud. It did not shake, but it cut through the room like a steel blade. Tristan looked at me through the reflection in the mirror, not even flinching. He actually smiled. "Hey, Jules. Good timing. Mom said you would not mind. I have to admit you have surprisingly good taste. The fabric is incredible. Much better than the rental catalog." I said, "Take it off. Right now. That is my wedding tuxedo. I paid for it with my own money. You broke into my apartment and you stole it." My mother stood up slowly, spitting the pins into her manicured hand, her face contorting into that familiar, infuriating mask of disappointed superiority. "Do not use such ugly, dramatic words, Julian. Nobody stole anything. We borrowed it. You are not getting married for another 14 months, and Tristan's wedding is in 12 weeks. He needs a bespoke suit, and there simply is not enough time to order one from Europe. We are in a crisis." "Then he should have planned better," I snapped, taking a threatening step into the room. "That is my property. Take it off." Aunt Vivian set her teacup down with a sharp, echoing clatter. "Julian, stop throwing a tantrum. You are a grown man behaving like a toddler. Your brother is in a bind, his fiancée is stressed, and you are being incredibly selfish. Family shares." Family shares. I looked directly at Vivian, a wave of pure disgust rising in my throat. Where was the sharing when my college fund was emptied for his tuition? Where was the sharing when I had to take out massive federal loans while he got a free ride? I bought this with my own salary, my money. I am not financing his lifestyle anymore. Oh, for heaven's sake! My mother groaned, dramatically rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. Always counting pennies, always keeping score. It is exhausting. Fine. We will pay for the premium dry cleaning after the wedding. Tristan is wearing this. It fits the garden venue aesthetic perfectly. End of discussion. I looked at Tristan. He was smirking. A slow, deeply arrogant smirk that told me he knew exactly what he was doing. He loved the power trip. He loved that he could just snap his fingers and watch our mother strip me of the one nice thing I owned. If I pushed this to a lawsuit, if I called the police for theft, my mother would hire the best defense lawyer in the state just to crush me in court. They would tie me up in legal fees until I broke. I did not yell. I did not scream. I let the heavy silence stretch for 5 long seconds. I looked at the dark charcoal fabric, visualizing the intricate, hand-stitched silk lining inside. Then I let the hot anger go. I let it sink deep down into the cold, calculating, ruthless part of my brain. You know what? I said, my voice eerily calm and submissive. Fine. If you want it that badly, keep it. My mother blinked, visibly surprised by my sudden capitulation. Well, thank you, Julian. See? That was not so hard. I knew you would see reason. But, I added, holding up a single finger, it clearly does not fit you right in the shoulders, Tristan. It is pulling at the seams. If you take it to a random mall tailor, they will ruin the hand stitching and the entire jacket will fall apart. Let me take it back to my master tailor, Sylvia. I will have her alter it to fit you perfectly. Consider it my early wedding gift to you. Tristan looked at my mother, raising an eyebrow, then shrugged his broad shoulders. Sure. Saves me a trip downtown. Make sure she takes the waist in a 1/2 inch. Bianca wants a tapered look. I gathered the thick garment bag, carefully packed up my suit, and walked out of the house. I did not drive home. I drove straight into the city, navigating the heavy traffic until I reached Sylvia's boutique shop. When I walked in and explained exactly what had happened, Sylvia, a fiery, old-school artisan who poured her absolute soul into her garments, was absolutely livid. She threw her measuring tape across the counter. They want to take my masterpiece and hack it to pieces for a spoiled thief? She fumed, pacing the floor of her shop, her face flushed with artistic outrage. No, Sylvia. I need you to adjust it just like I promised, I said, leaning against the counter. But I also need you to do something else. Something unprecedented. I pulled out my phone and called Penelope. Penelope is my oldest friend from college, a brilliant software engineer with a mind for creative, highly technical problem-solving. Within 20 minutes, Penelope and Fiona were sitting in the tailor shop with me and Sylvia. The door locked, the closed sign flipped outward. I explained the overarching plan. Penelope pulled up the architectural blueprints for Tristan's wedding venue on her laptop. It is an automated garden fountain system, Penelope explained, tapping the glowing screen. State-of-the-art hydrology. It is programmed to run gentle background water features during the ceremony, but the main geysers can be overridden manually from a centralized control box hidden behind the decorative east pillars. I can get into that box. I can bypass the digital lock in under 60 seconds. Sylvia smiled, a wicked, brilliant gleam lighting up her eyes. And the suit? What exactly do you want me to do to the suit, Julian? Tristan is going to wear a crisp, thin white dress shirt under this jacket, I said, running my hand over the dark wool. Sylvia, is there a way to line the inside of the jacket with something reactive? Something that looks completely normal and invisible when dry, but if it gets soaked with water, it bleeds. Sylvia's smile widened into a full, dangerous grin. She walked over to a locked cabinet and pulled out a small glass vial. Oh, honey, I have a specialized theatrical fabric dye imported from Italy. It is completely transparent when dry, but the moment it hits heavily chlorinated or chemically treated water, like the water pumped through commercial fountain systems, it activates instantly. It bleeds a neon, permanent, unwashable crimson red. And the best part? I can sew it directly into the silk lining in a highly specific pattern. When it gets wet, it will stamp right onto his white shirt like a branding iron. Can you make it spell something? Fiona asked, her voice trembling with a mix of shock and anticipation. "I can stitch the dye into a concentrated stencil," Sylvia confirmed, tapping the glass vial against the table. "What do you want it to say?" I looked at the charcoal jacket lying vulnerable on the cutting table. The symbol of my hard work. The symbol of my brother's endless greed. "Make it say, property of Julian," in bold, massive letters across the entire back panel. The remaining weeks leading up to the grand wedding were an absolute masterclass in psychological endurance and deception. I played my part perfectly, burying my disgust beneath a veneer of supportive brotherhood. I picked up the beautifully altered suit from Sylvia, the deadly, invisible secret woven flawlessly into the luxurious silk lining, and handed it over to Tristan with a warm smile. I attended the final suit fittings, standing by the mirror and nodding approvingly as Tristan preened and posed. "It really does look better on me, does it not?" Tristan boasted during one of these tedious sessions, aggressively adjusting the French cuffs. "It gives me that CEO look. Bianca is going to lose her mind." "It looks exactly like it is supposed to look on you," I replied evenly, my voice smooth as glass. My mother beamed from the corner of the room, loudly praising my newfound maturity and my willingness to finally put family first. But beneath the calm surface, the storm was rapidly gathering strength. Penelope had visited the luxury venue twice under the guise of being an assistant event planner checking electrical outlets. She had meticulously mapped out the exact location of the fountain control panel, right behind the east pillar of the grand altar. Fiona and I spent our evenings in our living room, rehearsing our physical positions. It was not just about the water. It was about the exact, perfect timing. It had to be a moment of maximum visibility. It had to be a moment captured by the expensive photographers. It had to be a public humiliation he could never, ever take back. The real test of my nerves came 3 days before the wedding, at the extravagant rehearsal dinner. My parents had rented out the entire top floor of a high-end downtown steakhouse. The expensive wine was flowing freely, and the toasts were endless, each one nauseatingly praising Tristan's brilliant business acumen, Bianca's stunning beauty, and their perfect, charmed, untouchable life. I was seated near the far end of the long mahogany table, completely ignored as usual, when my cousin Marcus sat down heavily next to me. Marcus is a loud, careless guy who works in real estate and always drinks significantly more than his body can handle. "Hey, Jules," Marcus slurred, throwing a heavy arm around my shoulder, nearly spilling his whiskey. "Man, it is wild what you are doing, letting him wear your custom threads. If my brother took my stuff like that, I would probably drown him in that fancy outdoor fountain they got at the venue." My blood ran completely cold. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. I glanced sharply at Marcus, analyzing his flushed face. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" Marcus leaned in close, breathing hot bourbon directly into my face. "Come on, man. I saw you and your techie friend Penelope poking around the garden venue last Thursday when I was there dropping off the final deposit check for the DJ. You guys were looking intently at the water pipes behind the altar. What is the gag? Are you going to shut the water off during the kiss as a prank?" I felt a sudden, sharp, terrifying spike of adrenaline hit my chest. If Marcus said this any louder, if my mother or Tristan heard even a fragment of this conversation, the entire plan would be ruined. They would immediately inspect the venue, they would hire security to lock down the control panels, and Tristan would get away with stealing my property with absolutely zero consequences. All my planning would be for nothing. I gripped Marcus's forearm under the table, squeezing hard enough to make him wince slightly. I forced a relaxed, conspiratorial laugh, channeling every ounce of acting ability I possessed. "Keep your voice down, man. Seriously. Yeah, Penelope and I were looking at it. But we are not shutting it off. We are trying to figure out how to sync the underwater fountain lights to the exact moment they say, 'I do.' It is a massive surprise for Bianca. She loves light shows. If you ruin it by talking too loud, she will literally kill you, and my mother will ban you from the open bar." Marcus's eyes widened in realization, and he tapped the side of his nose clumsily. "Got it. My lips are sealed. Sinking the lights. Very classy, Jules. Very classy. He stumbled away to get another drink from the bartender, and I let out a long, shaky breath I did not know I was holding. The crisis was averted, but it was a terrifyingly close call. Later that evening, as the dinner was finally winding down and guests were waiting for the valet, my father approached me. Harrison had always been the quiet, cowardly enforcer of my mother's iron will. He never actively belittled me the way my mother did, but his constant silence was its own profound kind of betrayal. Whenever I needed him to stand up for me as a child, he would look at the floor, polish his glasses, and mumble about keeping the peace and not upsetting Margaret. "Julian," my father said softly, pulling me gently into the carpeted hallway outside the private dining room. He looked older tonight, the lines around his eyes deep and tired. He glanced nervously back toward the dining room doors, making absolutely sure my mother was not watching us. "Yes, Dad?" I asked, keeping my posture rigid and defensive. He shifted his weight awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. I just wanted to say thank you for being the bigger person about the bespoke suit. I know exactly how much it meant to you. I saw the bank statements. I know you paid for it yourself, working all those late nights." I stared at him, my expression hardening. The sheer, pathetic inadequacy of his words was staggering. "You know I paid for it, and yet you stood there and let Mom give the key to my private apartment to Aunt Vivian so they could break in and steal it. You knew and you did nothing." My father flinched as if I had struck him. "Julian, it is complicated. You know how your mother gets. She gets fixated on Tristan having the best. And Tristan is under a lot of pressure at the firm. I tried to talk her out of it, I really did, but you know how she is. She would have made the next 6 months a living hell for everyone. I know exactly how she is, Dad, and I know exactly how you are. You let it happen because it is easier for you to sacrifice me than to stand up to her." He looked down at his polished shoes, his shoulders sagging in defeat. Slowly, he reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a thick, plain white envelope. His hand trembled slightly as he held it out to me in the dim light of the hallway. "I know this does not fix it. I know it does not erase what happened. But I want you to have this. It is a cashier's check. It is enough to cover the full cost of the stolen suit, and then some. I want you to go to that tailor and buy an even better one for your own wedding." I looked down at the envelope. I did not raise my hand to take it. I realized in that profound moment that he knew a storm was coming. He might not know the mechanical details of the fountain, but he could feel the dangerous shift in the air. This was his guilt money. This was his pathetic attempt to wash his hands of the sins of his wife and his older son before the inevitable collapse. He wanted to buy his innocence. "Keep it, Dad," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth, any anger, any emotion at all. "I do not need your hush money. I have a good job. I pay my own bills. Tristan is the one who constantly needs handouts to maintain his fake lifestyle. But do not worry about the suit. He is going to get exactly what he deserves on Saturday." I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit, leaving my father standing completely alone in the quiet hallway, holding an envelope full of useless apologies. The pieces were all firmly placed on the board. The trap was set, loaded, and primed. All that was left was for the golden child to walk right into the center of the crosshairs. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sickeningly perfect blue sky. It was exactly the kind of unblemished, idyllic weather that my mother would immediately claim as a personal blessing from the universe for her golden child. The venue was a historic botanical garden located on the absolute wealthiest edge of the city, an exclusive piece of prime real estate that usually required a 2-year waiting list, a background check, and a non-refundable deposit larger than my entire annual salary. Bianca's father, the prominent commercial real estate mogul, had called in massive political favors to secure it on such short notice. Every single detail of the sprawling grounds screamed old money, untouchable privilege, and generational wealth. Massive, ancient oak trees draped in silver Spanish moss lined the grand, sweeping driveway, and perfectly manicured rose hedges guided the elite guests toward the central courtyard. And there, right at the focal point of the outdoor altar, was the massive automated fountain system. Fiona, Penelope, and I arrived 2 hours early. I was wearing my old, reliable navy blue suit, the exact same one Tristan had so casually mocked at his engagement party. Fiona looked absolutely stunning in a deep emerald, floor-length dress, her hand resting firmly on my arm, grounding me in reality. Penelope was dressed in a sleek, tailored black jumpsuit, carrying an oversized designer leather tote bag that secretly housed her high-end laptop, a portable router, and a tangled mess of specialized digital override cables. We walked through the grand wrought iron gates, projecting nothing but supportive, docile, obedient family energy. We were the picture of compliance. The atmosphere was already thick with the heavy scent of imported lilies and the buzzing, arrogant anticipation of local high society. A small army of valets in crisp uniforms were frantically parking an endless stream of luxury vehicles. I watched as they carefully navigated a convoy of gleaming machines. A matte black Rolls-Royce, a sleek silver Porsche, a cherry red Ferrari, and a custom Lamborghini that likely cost more than my entire neighborhood. Caterers in pristine white uniforms were rushing back and forth across the stone patios, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes and caviar blinis. I could literally feel the sheer volume of money burning through the air. My parents had leveraged massive amounts of their savings, and likely heavily dipped into the retirement accounts they had spent 30 years building, just to match the financial energy of Bianca's incredibly wealthy family. Before taking our designated seats in the lower-tier section, I was abruptly summoned to the groom's staging area by a frantic wedding coordinator. The staging room was essentially a small, detached luxury mansion adjacent to the main gardens, filled with oversized leather couches, a fully stocked private mahogany bar, and a dozen groomsmen wearing expensive, identical rental tuxedos. But standing in the exact center of the room, soaking up the adoration and attention like a dry sponge, was my brother Tristan. He was wearing my bespoke wedding tuxedo. Seeing it on him again, fully pressed, lint-rolled, and professionally styled for his wedding day, sent a sharp, agonizing spike of pure adrenaline straight through my chest. The dark charcoal gray will caught the ambient room light beautifully, showcasing the incredible quality of the fabric. The fit, thanks to Sylvia's masterful but secretly weaponized alterations, was absolutely, undeniably flawless. It hugged his broad shoulders perfectly and tapered at his waist, making him look incredibly sharp and powerful. He was adjusting the collar of his crisp, blindingly white, custom-fitted dress shirt, completely and blissfully unaware of the chemical landmine resting just a few millimeters away against his skin. "Julian," my mother practically sang as I walked into the crowded room. She was wearing an aggressively lavish, heavily beaded silver gown that looked far more appropriate for a Hollywood red carpet than a daytime garden wedding. She swept across the room, her high heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor, and grabbed my shoulders, her manicured acrylic nails digging painfully into my cheap navy suit jacket. "Look at him. Just look at your brother. Have you ever in your life seen a more handsome groom? That bespoke suit was the best financial decision we ever made. He looks like a Fortune 500 CEO ready to conquer the world." She said the word "we" as if she had financed the garment herself. She said "we" as if breaking into my apartment and taking my personal property was a collaborative, loving family project. I forced a warm, totally dead, entirely plastic smile onto my face. I looked her right in the eye, channeling every single ounce of self-control I had spent a lifetime building. "He looks exactly the way he deserves to look today," I said smoothly, my voice completely level. The heavy double meaning of the sentence tasted incredibly sweet on my tongue, a delicious secret known only to me and my two accomplices waiting outside. Tristan turned away from the full-length mirror, holding a heavy crystal glass of 20-year-old aged scotch. He walked over and clapped me hard on the shoulder, a deeply condescending gesture of mock brotherhood designed to show his dominance in front of his wealthy groomsmen. "Thanks, little brother. I have to admit, you literally saved my life with this piece." Bianca's dad was just in here a minute ago checking on us, and he was totally blown away by the hand stitching on the lapels. He even talked about pushing up that senior management promotion at the firm now that I actually look the part. Clothes make the man, right? And this suit is going to make me a lot of money. They certainly reveal the true nature of the man, I replied, maintaining unbroken, intense eye contact with him. I am just incredibly glad Sylvia could finish the final adjustments in time. You want to make sure you stay completely dry today, though, Tristan. Wool of that high caliber does not mix well with moisture. You wouldn't want to ruin the interior silk lining. It is very delicate. Tristan laughed loudly, a booming, arrogant sound that echoed off the high ceilings, completely missing the underlying, glaring threat I had just delivered directly to his face. Dry? Julian, look outside those windows. There is not a single cloud in the sky. The humidity is perfectly low. It is going to be a completely perfect day. But hey, I really do appreciate the sacrifice. I know you paid a lot for this. I will have it professionally dry cleaned by the best service in the city and dropped back off at your apartment by next week. Assuming I do not decide to keep it for my upcoming corporate charity gala. It really is too nice to just sit in a closet. He winked at me. He actually genuinely winked. In his narcissistic mind, the tuxedo was already his permanent, rightful property. He had stolen it, worn it, received massive compliments on it, and now he was casually, effortlessly informing me that he was keeping it indefinitely. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was absolutely breathtaking. It validated every single dark, vengeful thought I had harbored over the past month. Tristan, honey, it is time for the formal portraits by the grand staircase, Aunt Vivian announced, bustling into the room holding a thick clipboard and wearing a headset. She looked me up and down with open, naked disdain. Julian, you can go find your seat in the back now. The photographer said family photos are only for the immediate wedding party and the bride's parents right now. We do not want your off-the-rack navy suit clashing with the groomsman's highly coordinated aesthetic. It will ruin the symmetry of the shots. Of course, Aunt Vivian, I said, my voice dripping with fake humility and total submission. I know my exact place. I will just go sit with Fiona and wait quietly for the show to start. I walked out of the staging room, my heart hammering a violent, rhythmic beat against my ribs. I walked back out into the bright sunlight and found Penelope standing casually near the main catering tent, pretending to admire a massive, towering floral arrangement of white orchids. I gave her a nearly imperceptible, sharp nod. The golden child is fully dressed, I whispered out of the corner of my mouth as I walked past her. The package is secure on the target. He is wearing the white shirt underneath. Penelope smirked, a dangerous, brilliant flash of teeth, tapping the side of her heavy leather tote bag. I am moving to the east pillar right now. The main control box is poorly guarded. It is just a basic, outdated combination padlock I bumped open during the rehearsal yesterday. Give me exactly 5 minutes to patch my override terminal into their main hydro board. I have the sequence completely programmed and locked in. When you hear the priest start the final blessing, when he says the exact words husband and wife, I am going to unleash absolute, biblical hell on that altar. I walked down the long, white-carpeted, petal-strewn aisle and took my seat in the 4th row, on the far right edge, ensuring I had a clear line of sight to both the altar and the fountain. Fiona reached out and grabbed my hand, her fingers trembling slightly with electric anticipation. We sat in total silence, watching the hundreds of wealthy, connected guests filter into the courtyard. Bianca's family took up the entire sprawling front section on the left, dripping in authentic diamonds, Rolex watches, and expensive designer fabrics. My parents sat in the front row on the groom's side on the right, my mother practically vibrating with smug, overwhelming satisfaction, looking around to make sure everyone saw her sitting in the seat of honor. I looked past the elaborate floral archway of the altar. The fountain was a massive, 3-tiered antique marble structure, flanked by heavy Romanesque stone pillars. Currently, it was burbling a gentle, elegant, perfectly calibrated stream of water, creating a soothing background noise for the upscale crowd. Behind the thick east pillar, completely out of sight of the wealthy guests and the roaming security staff. I knew Penelope was sitting cross-legged in the dirt, her laptop glowing brightly in the shadows, her fingers hovering over the detonator to my family's social and financial destruction. The trap of their own overwhelming complacency was fully set. They were so utterly blinded by their arrogance, so completely convinced that I was a broken, compliant, spineless doormat, that they never even considered the remote possibility of retaliation. They truly believed I would just sit there in my cheap suit and swallow the bitter humiliation while they paraded my stolen property in front of the city's financial elite. The live string quartet seamlessly transitioned from classical background music to the grand, sweeping, emotional chords of the traditional bridal march. The crowd collectively stood up, a wave of rustling, expensive fabric. It was time. The execution was about to begin. The ceremony was an absolute masterclass in superficial, expensive perfection. Tristan stood at the altar, his hands clasped confidently in front of him, looking every inch the wealthy, successful heir apparent in my stolen custom tuxedo. Bianca floated down the long aisle in a custom, hand-beaded designer silk gown that probably cost significantly more than my entire 4-year college education. My mother was openly weeping tears of performative joy, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking incredibly proud of the beautiful, flawless illusion she had ruthlessly orchestrated. Reverend Alden, a highly respected and rather stern figure in the local community, who often handled the marriages of the city's elite, began the ceremony. His deep, resonant voice echoed clearly across the sprawling courtyard through the expensive, hidden sound system. He spoke eloquently about trust, about honoring sacred vows, and about the fundamental necessity of building a life based on absolute truth, transparency, and mutual respect. The irony was so incredibly thick it was practically choking me. I sat rigidly in my chair, my spine straight, my eyes darting rapidly between Tristan's broad back and the east pillar where Penelope was hidden in the shadows. "We come now to the exchanging of the vows," Reverend Alden announced, stepping back slightly to give the couple the spotlight. "Tristan, you may begin." Tristan took Bianca's hands, clearing his throat confidently. He had insisted on writing his own vows, and just like my stolen high school graduation speech, they were entirely, aggressively focused on his own magnificence. "Bianca," Tristan started, his voice projecting loudly for the 3 different camera crews recording from the aisles. "From the very first moment I met you, I knew I was destined for greatness. You are the absolute perfect addition to the incredible, successful life I have built with my own 2 hands. I promise to always provide for you, to always protect you, and to always wear the heavy mantle of leadership in our family with pride and honor. I promise to always be the center of your world, just as you are the beautiful, perfect complement to mine." Fiona leaned over to me, her shoulder touching mine, and whispered in my ear. He actually managed to make his sacred wedding vows entirely about his own massive ego. It is almost mathematically impressive. "Wait for it," I whispered back, my eyes locked on the tiered marble fountain directly behind him. "And do you, Tristan, take Bianca to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Reverend Alden asked solemnly, holding his leather-bound book. "I do," Tristan said proudly, loudly, ensuring everyone heard his commitment. "And do you, Bianca, take Tristan?" The vows concluded. The heavy diamond rings were exchanged. The crowd was completely silent, utterly captivated by the romantic, flawless climax of the multimillion-dollar production. "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Alden boomed, closing his book. "You may kiss the bride." Tristan leaned in, wrapping his arms around Bianca for a sweeping, dramatic, highly choreographed kiss. The lead photographer rushed forward, dropping to one knee, snapping a rapid-fire series of flashes to capture the perfect, pristine moment for the society pages. This was it, the absolute peak of his life, the signal. Behind the east pillar, Penelope hit the execution key on her laptop. It did not happen slowly. It happened with the violent, explosive, terrifying force of a detonated municipal water main. The gentle, elegant, burbling streams of the antique marble fountain abruptly stopped for a fraction of a second, completely silencing the courtyard, creating a vacuum of sound. And then, a massive, deafening mechanical roar shook the very ground beneath our feet. 3 industrial-grade hydrogeysers, designed specifically to shoot water 50 feet straight up into the air for grand, synchronized holiday displays, fired simultaneously at maximum pressure. But Penelope had not just turned them on. She had completely, maliciously recalibrated the directional pressure valves. Instead of shooting straight up into the sky, the massive cannons of highly pressurized, chemically treated fountain water blasted forward at a precise 45-degree angle, directly over the marble basin, and completely enveloped the altar. It hit Tristan and Bianca like a localized, high-velocity monsoon. A collective, blood-curdling scream of pure terror erupted from the 200 wealthy guests. The sheer, physical force of the water knocked the massive, heavy floral arrangements off their stone pedestals, sending thousands of white roses and shattered vases scattering across the soaked grass. Tristan and Bianca were instantly, violently drenched to the bone. Bianca's incredibly expensive, intricate silk gown immediately collapsed into a heavy, ruined, transparent, muddy mess, the weight of the water physically pulling her down to her knees on the hard stone. Tristan staggered backward, sputtering wildly, waving his hands blindly in front of his face as hundreds of gallons of heavy, cold fountain water pounded relentlessly against his head, his shoulders, and his stolen tuxedo. "The water! Shut off the water!" my mother shrieked hysterically, jumping out of the front row, her expensive silver gown instantly getting ruined by the splashing mud and debris. She waved her arms like a maniac. The venue security guards began running frantically toward the altar, completely confused, screaming useless orders into their shoulder radios. Reverend Alden had managed to dive out of the way of the main blast, standing off to the side, looking absolutely bewildered, his holy book soaked. The geysers blasted for exactly 10 agonizing, perfect seconds before Penelope's automated override script gracefully shut them down, returning the fountain to its gentle, mocking, elegant burble as if nothing had happened. Absolute, stunned silence slammed back into the courtyard, broken only by the sound of dripping water, the frantic crackle of security radios, and Bianca's loud, gasping, hysterical sobs. Tristan was standing in the dead center of the ruined altar, coughing up chlorinated water, aggressively wiping his soaked, heavily gelled hair out of his burning eyes. "What the hell was that?" Tristan roared at the approaching venue staff, his face purple with veins popping on his forehead. "You ruined my wedding. Look at my suit. You ruined my custom suit. I am going to sue this entire facility into bankruptcy." He angrily turned his back to the shocked crowd to reach down and help his sobbing bride up from the flooded floor. And that is exactly when the true, magnificent magic of Sylvia's Italian chemical dye took center stage. The bespoke charcoal wool jacket was completely, utterly saturated. The heavy water had soaked straight through the thick outer layer of wool and instantly activated the hidden chemical stencil woven deep into the delicate silk lining. As Tristan bent over, the wet wool clung tightly, shrink-wrapping against the broad expanse of his back, pressing the inner silk lining directly against his soaking wet, thin, translucent white dress shirt. The chemical reaction was instantaneous, flawless, and violently bright. A massive, neon crimson red stain began to bleed rapidly through the back of his dark jacket. It was not a subtle, faded color. It was the color of a fresh, glowing arterial wound. And it was not just a random, messy stain. The highly concentrated dye bled outward, outlining the perfect, sharp, aggressive typography Sylvia had meticulously stitched into the fabric. The crowd collectively gasped. It was not a gasp of shock from the water. It was a collective, horrified intake of breath from 200 high society guests, CEOs, and real estate developers realizing exactly what they were looking at. Across the entire broad expanse of Tristan's back, glowing in unwashable, blood-red neon letters that had bled straight through the wool and permanently branded his white shirt underneath, were the massive words. Property of Julian stolen for Tristan, my mother, who had rushed onto the flooded altar with a handful of useless cocktail napkins, stopped dead in her tracks as if she had hit an invisible brick wall. She stared at Tristan's back, her jaw dropping open so wide it looked physically unhinged. Tristan felt the sudden, chilling, judgmental silence of the massive crowd. He turned around to face the audience, looking confused, incredibly angry, and completely pathetic. What are you all staring at? Help my wife. Bianca, shivering violently on the floor, looked up at him through her ruined makeup. She saw the bright, glowing red dye pooling around his collar and seeping rapidly through the front of his shirt as well, tracing the jagged edges of the hidden stencil. Tristan, your suit. It is bleeding. Your shirt is bleeding red. What? Tristan frantically ripped the soaked, heavy charcoal jacket off his shoulders and held it out in front of him. He stared down at the glowing red letters permanently burned into the inside lining, and then looked down in horror at his ruined white shirt, which was now stamped with a massive mirror image of the undeniable accusation. He slowly, agonizingly raised his head and locked eyes with me. I was standing in the fourth row, completely dry, completely immaculate, holding Fiona's hand. I was not frowning. I was not angry. I was smiling. It was the coldest, most deeply satisfied, peaceful smile of my entire life. Julian, my mother screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, guttural wail of absolute disbelief and fury. What did you do? You monster. You ruined his wedding. You ruined our family. The crowd immediately started whispering fiercely, the gossip spreading like wildfire. Bianca's father, the imposing real estate mogul, marched aggressively onto the flooded altar, ignoring the mud ruining his designer shoes. His face was dark with fury, staring directly at the glowing words on the suit. Tristan, what the hell does this mean? Did you steal your brother's clothing for my daughter's wedding? Are you a common thief? No. We borrowed it. Tristan stammered, stepping backward, the arrogant CEO facade completely and utterly shattering in front of his wealthy new in-laws. He looked pathetic. He looked exactly like the petty, entitled thief he truly was. The immediate aftermath on the altar was a scene of unparalleled, beautiful, deeply satisfying chaos. The expensive wedding planner was having a literal, hyperventilating panic attack near the crushed rose bushes, screaming into her headset. The lead photographer, realizing the journalistic goldmine unfolding before him, was discreetly zooming in on the glowing red letters on Tristan's ruined shirt, capturing the undeniable, high-definition evidence of his humiliation for eternity. Bianca was weeping uncontrollably, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, muddy streaks, screaming at her bridesmaids to help her get inside away from the staring eyes. Everybody inside. Now, turn the cameras off. Aunt Vivian shrieked at the top of her lungs, waving her arms wildly, trying desperately to corral the soaked bridal party and shield Tristan's glowing back from the judging, calculating eyes of the city's elite. Fiona and I did not run. We did not rush. We walked at a leisurely, dignified, incredibly calm pace toward the grand manor house, joining the stampede of confused, whispering, gossiping guests. Penelope easily slipped out from behind the stone pillar, merging seamlessly into the thick crowd, her laptop safely hidden away in her tote bag. Inside the massive, luxurious bridal suite, the atmosphere was highly combustible and intensely claustrophobic. Tristan had frantically stripped off the ruined, glowing shirt and was standing bare-chested, shivering violently, holding the neon-stained charcoal jacket like a dead, radioactive animal. Bianca was locked inside the adjacent marble bathroom with her furious mother, screaming at the top of her lungs about how her perfect, million-dollar day was a total, irredeemable laughingstock. I pushed the heavy, ornate wooden doors open and stepped into the center of the room with Fiona firmly by my side. My mother lunged at me the second I crossed the threshold. She literally sprinted across the antique Persian rug, her hands raised like claws, her face distorted with a level of pure, unadulterated rage I had never seen before in my life. "You malicious, evil little sociopath!" she screamed, raising her hand high to slap me across the face with everything she had. I did not flinch, but I did not have to block her either. Suddenly, a heavy, calloused hand caught my mother's wrist midair, stopping her completely. It was my father. Harrison stood directly between me and my mother, his face incredibly pale, but his grip on her arm was incredibly firm and unyielding. "Margaret, stop. Do not touch him. Do not lay a single finger on him ever again." My mother looked at him as if he had suddenly grown a second head. She tried to yank her arm away, but he held tight. "Harrison, are you blind? Look at what he did to Tristan. He completely sabotaged the wedding. He humiliated us in front of the entire city's elite. Bianca's father is threatening to cancel the marriage. Call the police right now. Have him arrested for assault and vandalism." I laughed, a loud, sharp, incredibly cold bark of genuine amusement. "Arrested for what exactly, Mother? For a sudden, unexplainable mechanical malfunction in the venue's plumbing system? You cannot prove a single thing. And even if you could somehow find a shred of evidence, what exactly are you going to tell the police? That your youngest son ruined the suit that you literally broke into his apartment to steal? Because I have the high-definition security footage of you and Vivian entering my home with a stolen key. I have the bank receipts and the tailor's invoices proving legal ownership of that bespoke suit. If you want to involve the authorities, I will gladly, happily file a massive, crushing lawsuit against both of you for grand larceny, trespassing, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I will bankrupt you in legal fees." Tristan threw the ruined, glowing jacket onto the floor in a fit of rage. "You are completely psychotic, Julian. It was just a suit. You ruined my entire life, my career, my marriage, over a piece of fabric." "It was never about the fabric, Tristan," I said, my voice dropping to a low, incredibly dangerous register that immediately commanded the silence of the entire room. "It was about the undeniable fact that you have spent 29 years believing you have a divine right to consume my life. You took my college fund so you could party. You took my graduation speech so you could look smart. You took my dignity. But you made a fatal, arrogant miscalculation. You assumed I would just let you take my wedding tuxedo without consequences because I have always been quiet. You are not a king, Tristan. You are a spoiled, overgrown, incompetent child wearing stolen clothes. And now, Bianca's extremely powerful family knows exactly who you are. A fraud." Before anyone could respond, the heavy doors to the suite swung open again with a loud crash. Mr. Caldwell, the wealthy, no-nonsense owner of the botanical gardens, marched into the room flanked by two massive security guards. He looked absolutely livid, holding a tablet in his hand. "Mr. Caldwell, thank God you are here," my mother cried, instantly attempting to switch back to her fragile victim persona, wiping away fake tears. "Your fountain malfunctioned and violently ruined my son's wedding. We will be expecting a full, immediate refund and massive compensation for the severe emotional trauma and the ruined designer clothes." Mr. Caldwell stared at her with complete, unmasked disgust. "Refund? Are you completely out of your mind, lady? My lead engineers just checked the override panel on the east pillar. Someone hacked the digital system, and while I cannot legally prove who did it in this specific room," he said, shooting a brief, entirely unreadable glance at me, "I can tell you with absolute certainty that my historic property is severely damaged. The high-pressure blast cracked the antique marble basin, and the chemical dye from whatever cheap, malicious gag you pulled has permanently stained the 200-year-old stone. The venue contract was signed by Tristan. You are personally, legally liable for all damages. My legal team will be sending you an itemized invoice for the repairs, which will easily exceed $50,000. If you do not pay within 30 days, I will drag you through the civil courts until you are completely bankrupt." Tristan went completely pale, his knees visibly shaking. 50,000? I cannot afford that. The wedding deposits completely wiped out my savings accounts. Then you better beg your rich new father-in-law for a massive loan, Mr. Caldwell sneered, crossing his arms. Though from the way he was just screaming in the hallway outside about annulments, fraud, and stolen suits, I highly doubt he is going to open his checkbook for a common thief. Now pack your things, get your people together, and get off my property before I have you all forcefully, physically escorted out for trespassing. Mr. Caldwell turned on his heel and marched out, the security guards closing the door behind him. The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating, and incredibly heavy. The golden child was entirely, completely broken. He stood there shivering in the cold air conditioning, facing immediate financial ruin, massive public disgrace, the loss of his corporate promotion, and the very real, immediate possibility of his wealthy bride walking away forever. I looked at my mother, who had collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, her silver dress stained with mud. I looked at Aunt Vivian, who was shrinking back against the wallpaper, utterly terrified of the legal threats I had just laid out. Finally, I looked at my father. He met my eyes, gave a slow, barely perceptible nod of absolute resignation, and physically stepped away from my mother. "I am leaving," I announced to the room, my voice crisp and final. I turned to Fiona and offered her my arm. "The show is over. Enjoy the rest of your pathetic lives, because you will never, ever be a part of mine again." We walked out of the bridal suite, out of the grand manor house, and into the bright, beautiful sunshine of the parking lot. We walked past the ruined altar, past the whispering, pointing guests, and drove away. I left them entirely, permanently trapped in the ruins of the disaster they had built with their own two hands. 1 exact year later, the air inside Sylvia's high-end tailor shop smelled warmly of expensive Italian wool, pressed steam, and quiet, earned dignity. I was standing on the elevated fitting pedestal, looking at myself in the three-way mirror. I was wearing a brand-new, bespoke wedding tuxedo. It was a deep, rich midnight blue with a flawless black satin lapel. It was perfect, and far more importantly, it was entirely, indisputably, legally mine. The brass bell above the shop door chimed softly. I looked in the mirror and saw my father walk in. He looked significantly older, his hair almost entirely gray now, but there was a strange, peaceful lightness to his posture that I had never, ever seen when he was living under my mother's iron rule. "It looks incredible, Julian," he said quietly, standing near the wooden cutting table, keeping a respectful distance. "Thank you," I said, stepping down from the pedestal and adjusting my cuffs. We had spoken a few times over the past year, mostly brief, heavily guarded phone calls. The fallout from Tristan's wedding had been truly apocalyptic. Bianca's family, utterly humiliated by the public scandal and terrified by Tristan's exposed financial liabilities with the venue, had forced him into a brutal, highly publicized divorce just 3 weeks after the ceremony. Without the powerful backing and influence of his wealthy father-in-law, Tristan's corporate firm quietly rescinded his upcoming senior promotion, citing internal character and integrity concerns. He had been laid off a month later. My mother had suffered a massive, undeniable social breakdown, completely ostracized by the country club elite she so desperately worshipped, forced to resign from her charity boards. And my father? He had finally, after 30 years, found his spine. "I wanted to make sure you got the cashier's check," my father said, pulling his hands out of his jacket pockets. "I sent it through my divorce lawyer, so your mother couldn't intercept it." "I got it," I confirmed, looking him in the eye. "And I appreciate it, though you really did not have to fund this new suit." "I did," he insisted firmly, his voice filled with regret. "Julian, I spent 29 years watching your mother systematically destroy your self-worth to build up a false, fragile idol. I was a terrible coward. I enabled the financial and emotional abuse because I was terrified of her rage and her retaliation. When you walked out of that bridal suite, and I saw Tristan standing there holding the literal proof of his theft, branded on his back, it finally broke the spell. I moved into a small apartment 3 months ago, The divorce is being finalized next week. It's going to cost me half my pension, but it's worth it. I stared at him, genuinely shocked by the sheer magnitude of his actions. Harrison, the eternal peacekeeper, the man who never rocked the boat, was finally burning the bridge to the ground. Are you sure, Dad? You're really leaving her? I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life, he said, a sad, weary smile touching his lips. I am completely cutting them off financially. Tristan will have to figure out his own life, pay off his own massive venue debts, and Margaret will finally have to face reality without my paycheck to fund her delusions. I am not asking for your immediate forgiveness, Julian. I know I have 3 decades of neglect to make up for. I just wanted to see you in the suit you deserved before your big day. To tell you I am proud of the man you became in spite of us. He patted my shoulder, a genuine, hesitant gesture of fatherly pride, and quietly left the shop, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The surprises, however, were not quite over. As I walked out of Sylvia's shop an hour later, carrying my new garment bag securely over my shoulder, a dark shadow detached itself from the brick alleyway next door. It was Tristan. I almost did not recognize my own brother. The arrogant, slicked-back, wealthy CEO persona was completely, utterly gone. He was wearing a wrinkled, faded button-down shirt. He had deep, dark bags under his bloodshot eyes, and he looked incredibly thin and worn out. He looked defeated. Julian, he croaked, taking a hesitant step forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Please, just give me 1 minute of your time. I tightened my grip on the garment bag, my posture instantly going rigid, ready for a fight. You have exactly 60 seconds before I walk to my car, Tristan. Speak. He swallowed hard, looking down at his scuffed, cheap shoes. I just wanted to say I am sorry, for everything, and I mean everything, not just the suit, for stealing the graduation speech, for taking the college fund, for treating you like absolute garbage our entire lives. Losing Bianca, losing the promotion, dealing with the massive lawsuit from Mr. Caldwell. It broke me. I'm drowning in debt. And sitting alone in my cheap apartment, it made me realize that I am nothing. I have never actually achieved a single thing on my own. Every success I ever had, I stole from you or begged from Mom and Dad. He looked up at me, and for the first time in our entire lives, I saw genuine, unadulterated shame in his eyes. There was no manipulation. There was no arrogant smirk. He was standing at the absolute bottom of a very deep, dark pit of his own making. I am not asking for an invitation to your wedding, Tristan continued, his voice breaking with emotion. I know I lost the right to be your brother a long time ago. I just needed to look you in the eye, man to man, and admit that you were always the better man. You always were. I am so sorry. I looked at the broken man standing in front of me. A year ago, I would have wanted to crush him further. I would have wanted to twist the knife, to gloat over his financial and personal ruin. But standing there, secure in my own life, holding the symbol of my upcoming marriage to a woman who truly loved and respected me, I realized something profound. I did not hate him anymore. I just felt an overwhelming sense of pity. I appreciate the apology, Tristan, I said quietly, my voice calm and devoid of anger. I really do, and I accept it. But an apology does not rewrite 30 years of history. It does not magically fix the severe damage you and Mom caused. You have a very long, very hard road ahead of you if you want to rebuild your life and actually become a decent human being. I genuinely hope you find a way to do it. But you have to do it without me. I turned my back on him and walked to my car. He did not follow me. He did not argue or beg. He just stood in the alley, accepting the hard boundary I had finally permanently established. My wedding day to Fiona was small, intimate, and absolutely perfect. It was held in a rustic, beautifully restored barn surrounded by our closest, truest friends. Penelope was my best woman, looking incredibly sharp in a tailored black suit. There were no massive fountains. There were no expensive ice sculptures. There were no society photographers. And there was absolutely no toxic family drama. My father attended, sitting quietly in the back row, respectfully keeping his distance but smiling the whole time. When Fiona walked down the aisle, her eyes shining with tears of joy, I knew I had finally won the long war for my own life. I was wearing my midnight blue tuxedo. I was standing on my own 2 feet, completely self-sufficient, completely seen, and completely loved for exactly who I was, not for what I could provide. Karma is often thought of as a cosmic force that strictly punishes the wicked. But I have learned through all of this that true karma is much more complex than that. Sometimes the universe does not just drop an anvil on the villain's head. Sometimes karma simply forces the undeniable truth into the bright, unforgiving light of day. It strips away the illusions, the lies, and the stolen property, forcing everyone to look at the ugly reality underneath. I had spent my entire life trying to shrink myself so my brother could look bigger. I had accepted the role of the invisible victim because it was the only way to survive in that toxic house. But the moment I stopped accepting their narrative, the moment I decided to stand up and forcefully demand my own agency and protect my own property, the entire house of cards collapsed. I lost a toxic mother, an enabling aunt, and the false illusion of a brother. But I gained a father who is finally trying to be a man. I gained a wife who is my ultimate partner in every sense of the word. And most importantly, I gained myself. I am no longer a donor bank for someone else's fragile ego. I am Julian, and my life is entirely, unquestionably my own property. Thank you for listening to my story. I know how incredibly heavy family dysfunction can be, and I know how terrifying it is to finally draw that line in the sand and stand up to the people who are supposed to love you. But trust me, the peace on the other side is worth every single moment of the storm. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to save your own sanity and your own future? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, and never let anyone steal your light.